The land was carved by God's own anger, a place of red rock and bleached bone. In this unforgiving furnace, two worlds collided, one of blue-coated soldiers and iron rails, the other of smoke, horse, and whispering spirits. This is not a tale of heroes. It is a story of the raw, bleeding edge of survival. It begins with a single sentence, spoken by a man who had lost everything and then found something he could not bear to lose. A giant Apache war chief, Delche, looked at his captive, and in a voice like gravel, he confessed a truth that would rewrite both their lives. She was captured by my men. Now I can't sleep without her in my arms. The sun was a brass hammer, beating the dust of the Arizona territory into a fine choking powder. For 10 days, Delche and his band of Chiricahua Apache had tasted nothing but mezcal root and frustration. They were not warriors today. They were ghosts, hunted by the Inda, the white soldiers, and driven from their own hunting grounds in the Dragoon Mountains. Delche was a man built on a scale that dwarfed others. His shoulders were as wide as a wagon gate, his hands scarred from 1,000 broken trails and 100 skirmishes. His men followed him not just for his size, but for the cold, calculating cunning in his dark eyes. He saw everything. He saw the hawk circling 3 miles distant. He saw the broken branch that told of a patrol's passing 2 days ago, and he saw the growing weakness in his own people. Beside him, Chato spat onto the cracked earth. Chato was all sinew and simmering hate, his face a map of old hatreds. "The women are slow," Chato grumbled, his words in the ND language. "The children wail. We need meat. We need rifles." Delche merely grunted, his gaze fixed on the faint trace of smoke to the south, near the Mexican border. A Nakai Yes ranch. A settler. "We will have both," Delche said, his voice a low rumble. The ranch was a foolish, brave scar on the land. A small, sod-walled house, a corral with 3 horses, and a half-plowed field. It belonged to Gideon Fry, a man stubborn enough to believe a rifle and a prayer could hold back the desert. He was wrong. The raid was not a battle. It was a storm. Delche's men swept down from the rocks like a flood. There were 4 riflemen at the ranch. The first 2, hired hands, fell before they could raise their guns. Gideon Fry got off 1 shot, catching an Apache warrior in the shoulder, before Chato's bullet slammed him backward into the water trough. The 4th man surrendered, and Chato finished him with a knife. It was brutal, efficient, and impersonal. Delche stalked through the small cabin. He gathered cartridges, a bag of flour, and 3 new rifles. It was a good haul. As his men rounded up the horses, he heard a sound from beneath the floorboards, a scrape. He kicked aside a bearskin rug, revealing the iron ring of a root cellar door. Chato leveled his rifle. "Burn it," Chato said. "Burn them out." Delche pushed the rifle barrel aside. "Waste of smoke. They will hear." He crouched, his massive frame blocking the light, and ripped the door from its hinges. The scream from below was thin, terrified. He reached down with 1 arm and hauled the figure out like a sack of grain. She landed in the dust, choking and gasping. She was not a child. She was a woman, perhaps 20 summers old, with hair the color of dried corn silk, now matted with dirt. Her dress was simple, torn at the shoulder. But it was her eyes that held him. They were wide with a terror so profound it circled back, around to a kind of paralyzed fury. Her name was Mireille Fry. She had just watched her father and his men be slaughtered. "Kill her," Chato said, already bored. "She is nothing." Mireille scrambled backward, her hands digging into the dirt. She was looking at Delche, at the man-mountain who had pulled her from the earth. He was, to her, the devil himself, rendered in bronze skin and black hair. Delche stared at her. He saw the Inda who had killed his wife, his sister. He saw the invaders. But he also saw the small, sharp intake of breath, the refusal to look away even as she trembled. She did not beg. She did not weep. She just stared. "No," Delche said, the word final. "She will slow us," Chato argued, his voice rising. "She is a white eye, a bad omen." "She is my captive," Delche replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. He grabbed Mireille's arm, his grip like a steel trap, and hauled her to her feet. "She will work, or she will be traded. She is mine. He threw her toward one of the captured horses. Mireille fell, but she got up. She looked once, a terrible, burning look, at the body of her father floating in the trough. Then she looked back at Delche. He felt an unfamiliar sensation, a cold knot in his stomach. It was not pity. It was possession. This small, fierce creature was his. He had claimed her. And as they rode away, the smoke of the burning ranch rising behind them, Delche did not know that he had just captured the one thing that would either save him or destroy him completely. The journey to the rancheria was a brutal education. They traveled for 3 days, moving mostly at night, cutting through arroyos and over knife-edge ridges where the horses struggled for footing. For Delche's warriors, it was a familiar hardship. For Mireille Fry, it was a waking nightmare. Her boots, sturdy for a ranch, were useless for this. The leather was rubbed raw, and her feet bled. The sun blistered her face and hands. The Apache women who rode with the band, widows of other raids, looked at her with undisguised contempt. They offered her no water and no food, save for the scraps Chato's wife threw at her feet. Delche rode at the head of the column, a silent, imposing figure. He rarely looked back, but Mireille felt his presence. It was like feeling the shadow of a mountain. He was aware of every stumbling step she took. On the second day, her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the shale, the sharp rocks cutting her hands. She couldn't get up. The column halted. Chato rode back, his face dark. She is done. He dismounted and raised the butt of his Winchester rifle. It is a kindness. Mireille flinched, turning her face away, bracing for the blow that would end the horror. The blow never came. A shadow fell over her. Delche had moved his horse between her and Chato. His own massive leg blocked Chato's path. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply stared down at his fellow warrior, and the air crackled with a violence far colder than Chato's simple brutality. Chato held his gaze for a long moment, his hand tight on the rifle. The rest of the band watched, silent. This was a challenge. Chato finally lowered the rifle, spat, and remounted. Delche dismounted. He loomed over Mireille. She cringed, expecting a different kind of violence. Instead, he unhooked a water skin from his own saddle. He didn't hand it to her. He dropped it. It landed in her lap with a heavy thud. He said one word in a voice that was not kind, but commanded obedience. Drink. She drank. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was life. It burned down her throat. When she was done, he pointed to her feet, then to his horse. Ride. He lifted her, one-handed, and set her on the horse's back, in front of his saddle. She was rigid, her body locked in terror, pressed against this giant, sweat-streaked man who smelled of leather, smoke, and the metallic tang of dried blood. He mounted behind her, his arms enclosing her like a cage. The rest of the journey she rode with him. She felt the heat of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was the most terrifying and, confusingly, the safest she had felt since the raid. She was the prisoner of the man who had just saved her life from his own people. Delche, for his part, was deeply unsettled. The feel of her, small and stiff against his chest, was an irritation. It reminded him of things he had buried. He remembered his Shide, his wife, who had ridden with him like this, her laughter warm against his ear. But his wife was gone, butchered by blue-coated soldiers near Casa Grande. This Nakai Yes woman was a symbol of that loss. And yet, she did not cry. She did not beg. She just endured. He felt the fine trembling in her body, but it was the trembling of exhaustion, not of surrender. He tightened his grip, telling himself it was to keep her from falling. But it was a lie. He was holding on to her. When they finally reached the stronghold, a hidden village of Wicayups nestled high in the Sierra Madre, he pulled her from the horse and shoved her toward the other women. She works, he commanded. She is to be watched. As Mireille was dragged away by the hostile women, she looked back at him one last time. Her face was a mask of dust and dried sweat, her eyes hollowed by grief. But in them, Delche saw an ember. He had thought to break her. Instead, he had merely bent her, and he found himself disturbed by a sudden, powerful urge to see that ember blaze. The rancheria was a place of survival, not comfort. Mireille's life became a ceaseless cycle of hard labor. Under the hateful gaze of the other women, she scraped animal hides until her hands were raw, ground corn on a metate until her shoulders ached, and hauled water from a brackish spring. She was a ghost among them, silent and watchful. She learned to anticipate a blow, to make herself small. Delche she rarely saw. He was the war chief, spending his days in council or hunting, but she knew when he was in the camp. A stillness would fall. The warriors walked with more purpose. The women worked with more diligence. He was the center of their universe, and she was just a piece of debris caught in his orbit. Then the sickness came. It started with the children. A burning fever followed by dysentery that turned the camp into a place of misery and fear. The Dayan, the shaman, chanted for 3 days, his rattle shaking, but the sickness only spread. 2 children died, then an old woman. Delche's own son, a quiet, watchful boy of 6 named Kyle, fell ill. Mireille watched from a distance as Delche sat outside his wickiup, a stone monolith of controlled panic. He did not leave his son's side. The Dayan performed his rituals, but the boy only grew weaker. Mireille knew this sickness. She had seen it on the wagon trails. It was the flux caused by bad water. She had seen her own mother treat it. On the 4th night of Kale's fever, Mireille knew the boy was dying. The shaman had given up. Delche sat alone, his head bowed. She made a decision. She was already dead. Her father was gone. Her life was over. What did one more risk matter? She walked across the central clearing. The few warriors still awake saw her, their hands moving to their knives. Chateau, sitting by his own fire, rose to his feet. Mireille ignored them. She walked directly to Delche's wickiup and stopped. He looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with exhaustion and grief. Seeing her, his expression hardened into a mask of pure rage. "Go!" he snarled. She stood her ground. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it would break her ribs. She pointed to the spring where they drew their water. "The water," she said, her voice a dry croak. "It is poison." Chateau strode over. "She speaks madness. She brings a curse." Mireille ignored him, her eyes locked on Delche. She pointed to the other spring, the one higher up the mountain, the one the animals used. "That water, boil it." Then she pointed to the willow trees growing by the main spring. "The bark. Tea." Delche stared at her. This white woman, his slave, was giving him orders. She was challenging the Dayan, challenging their ways. "It is a white-eye trick," Chateau said, grabbing her arm. "She would poison the boy." "He is already poisoned," Mireille snapped, yanking her arm free. The sudden fire in her voice shocked them both. "The water sickens him. The bark will cool the fever. I have seen it." Delche looked from Chateau to his dying son and back to Mireille. He saw no deceit in her face. He saw only a desperate, raw certainty. He was a man drowning, and she was offering a hand. He did not care if it was the hand of an enemy. He made his choice. "Do it," he commanded. The camp watched in stunned silence as Mireille, guarded by 2 warriors, was allowed to boil the fresh water and steep the willow bark. She brought the steaming, bitter tea to the wickiup. Delche took the cup from her. He looked at the dark liquid, then at her. He was putting his son's life, the last of his bloodline, in the hands of his captive. He lifted Kyle's head and forced the boy to drink. For the rest of the night, Mireille and Delche sat in the small, smoky hut. They did not speak. He sat against one wall, a knife in his hand. She sat by the boy, bathing his face with a damp rag. She showed him how to do it. He watched her. He watched her gentle hands, her focused expression. She was not a slave. She was not a white-eye. She was a woman fighting for a life. He saw in her the same iron will he'd seen in his own wife. Toward dawn, the shivering stopped. Cal's breathing, which had been shallow and fast, deepened. He fell into a true, healing sleep. Delche touched his son's forehead. The fire was gone. It was cool. He looked at Mireille, who was slumped against the wickiup wall, asleep from exhaustion. A profound and deeply unsettling shift happened inside him. The hatred he had nurtured for her people, the anger he felt at her presence, did not disappear, but it was now joined by a new, powerful, and terrifying emotion: gratitude. When the sun rose, Kel was sitting up, asking for water. That day, Delchay moved Mireille's sleeping robes from the common area to his own wickiup. He did not touch her. He did not speak to her as a wife. He gave her a place by the fire, a new blanket, in his protection. Chato and the others saw. The white woman was no longer a slave. She was something else. And that night, for the first time, Delchay lay down in his own home. He heard the quiet, steady sound of Mireille's breathing on the other side of the small fire. He had been a man plagued by nightmares for years, nightmares of the massacre that took his family. But with her breathing as a quiet anchor in the dark, his mind stilled. He fell into a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in memory. Life in the rancheria changed for Mireille. She was no longer chattel. She was Delchay Bijanacle, Delchay's protected one. The name was a shield in a cage. The other women still hated her, but now their hatred was mixed with a fearful respect. They left her alone. She lived in Delchay's wickiup. The space was small, intimate, and suffocatingly tense. They lived separate lives under the same roof. He would return from a hunt or a council, his massive frame filling the doorway, and nod to her. She would nod back. They were two strangers bound by an unspoken debt. But the silence began to fill with words. It started with Kale. The boy, now healthy, followed Mireille everywhere. He was fascinated by her, this strange woman who had saved him. He would point at things and say the me word. Tweesh, he'd say, pointing to a snake. Snake, she would reply. Gah, he'd say, pointing to his father's rifle. Gun. Delchay would sit, sharpening a knife, listening to this exchange. A faint, almost imperceptible softening would touch his harsh features. One evening, he was cleaning the rifle. Mireille sat mending Kel's moccasin. You, he said, the English word rough in his mouth. You're Bijan? Mireille looked up, confused. My... He tapped his own chest. Delchay. He pointed at her. Mireille, she said. My name is Mireille. Matilda, he repeated. The name sounded strange. A rock smoothed by a river. He then pointed to the rifle. You... shoot? She nodded. My father taught me. Gideon, he said. Mireille froze. The blood drained from her face. You know his name? I heard the man, Delchay said, his face unreadable. The one by the water. The raw grief hit her, fresh as the day of the raid. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. She did not want to cry in front of him. It was a weakness. Delchay watched her. He felt that familiar knot in his stomach. He had caused this grief. He was the monster from her nightmares. He should have felt pride. He was Apache. He was at war. But he felt shame, a deep, corrosive shame that angered him. He stood abruptly and left the wickiup. He did not return for hours. When he came back, she was asleep, or pretending to be. He lay down on his robes. The small hut was filled with the sound of her quiet, hitched breathing. He closed his eyes, expecting the old nightmares to return, fueled by his guilt. But they didn't. The sound of her breathing, even in sorrow, anchored him. It was a strange, powerful medicine. He realized with a jolt that was almost physical, that his own peace was now tied to her presence. His sleep was tied to her. The next night, he brought her something, a piece of blue trade cloth. He tossed it to her. For dress, he grunted. It was the first gift he had ever given a captive. But this new dynamic was poison to Chato. He watched as Delchay spent more time in his wickiup and less time in the council. He saw the way Delchay's eyes followed the white woman. He saw the leader of his people, the fiercest warrior of the Chiricahua, being softened by a Nakai yes witch. He forgets his wife, Chato spat to the other warriors. He forgets the Indi. That woman holds his Shiwul spirit in her hand. She makes him weak, and a weak leader will lead us all to slaughter. A new threat was rising, this one not from the soldiers, but from within. Chato's disapproval was hardening into a plan. He would not let this woman destroy them. He would force Delchay's hand. A few days later, a scout returned, his horse lathered. Soldiers, he panted. A full patrol. They come from the north. They ride fast. Delchay's head snapped up. His eyes, which had begun to soften, turned to black flint. He was a war chief again. How many? 20, led by a lieutenant. They are on our trail. Chato smiled, a thin, cruel expression. They have a good tracker. Delche looked at Chato. A sudden, cold suspicion entered his mind. The trail into the Sierra Madre was hidden. No Inda tracker was that good. Unless he had help. "We move," Delche commanded, his voice booming. "Now! We go to the Blood Canyon. We will make our stand there." As the camp erupted into frantic activity, Chato sidled up to Delche. "The woman," he said, his voice low. "She will be slow. A liability." "She rides with me," Delche said, his tone forbidding any argument. "And if we are overrun," Chato pressed, "if she is captured by the soldiers, she will tell them everything. Our paths, our numbers. She will doom us." He touched the knife at his belt. "It is better to end it now. For the people." Delche turned, his full height eclipsing Chato. He grabbed the front of Chato's shirt, lifting him slightly off the ground. "She is mine," he hissed, the words a low snarl. "If you touch her, if you even look at her, I will send you to the spirits myself." He threw Chato to the ground. The line had been drawn. As Delche stalked to his wiki-up to get Mireille, a terrible thought struck him. Chato was right about one thing. If Mireille was recaptured, she would talk. She would lead them back to her world. He entered the hut. She was packing a small bag, her face pale but resolved. She was ready. He looked at her, and for the first time, he was not just her captor, he was her protector. And he was terrified of losing her, not just to the soldiers, but to her own world. His obsession was complete. He could not sleep without her in his arms, in his hut, in his life. And he realized he would kill any man, Apache or white, who tried to take her away. The path to the Blood Canyon was a treacherous, near-invisible track. It was a place where a small band could hold off an army, a narrow slit in the earth with high walls and a deadly choke point. Delche had used it twice before to break cavalry charges. They moved with the desperate speed of the hunted. Delche put Mireille and Kyle on his own horse, and he ran beside them, his long legs eating the ground. His senses were alive, tasting the air, watching every rock, and the more he watched, the more his suspicion grew. Chato was riding scout, far ahead, but he was being careless. Delche stopped, halting the column. He knelt, his massive hand hovering over a patch of gravel. There was a footprint, deeper than it should be, a moccasin print, but pressed with the weight of a man trying to leave a mark. 100 yards later, he found a broken ocotillo branch, the break white and fresh, pointing in the direction of their travel. These were not the signs of a scout. These were the signs of a guide. Delche's blood ran cold. He understood. Chato was not just letting the soldiers follow, he was leading them. He was drawing Lieutenant Warren and his patrol into the canyon. It was a trap, but it was a trap with two jaws. Chato would lead the Inda into the ambush, yes, but he was also ensuring the Inda arrived. He was forcing a fight, and in the chaos of that fight, who would notice one stray bullet finding the white woman? Chato was engineering a crisis to cure his chief. He was willing to sacrifice half the band to kill Mireille and cleanse Delche. "Go!" Delche ordered his second-in-command, a steady warrior named Jer. "Take the women and children. Take Kyle. Hide them in the high caves. Take Mireille." Mireille, who had been dismounted, looked at him. "What is it?" "Go," he barked. He turned to his remaining 10 warriors. "We ride. We meet Chato." They found Chato at the canyon's mouth, waiting. He had a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "They are close," Chato said. 2 miles. We can set the ambush at the bend." Delche dismounted. He walked toward Chato, his face like a thunderhead. "You," he said, his voice a low vibration. "You have betrayed the NDA." Chato's hand flew to his knife. "I have saved the NDA. You are blind. You are witched by that white eye. You would trade your people for her. I am doing what you are too weak to do." "You brought the wolf to our door," Delche roared. He did not draw his rifle. He did not draw his knife. He lunged. It was not a fight. It was a collision. Delche's rage was a physical force. He slammed Chato against the canyon wall, the impact echoing like a gunshot. Chato was fast, a snake, and he slashed with his knife, opening a long, shallow cut on Delche's arm. Delche ignored it. He grabbed Chato's wrist, and the sound of bone breaking was sickeningly loud. Chato screamed. Delshay hit him, a massive, open-handed blow that sent Chato sprawling into the dust. The other warriors watched, horrified. This was forbidden. Two warriors at this moment. Delshay stood over the writhing Chato, his chest heaving. "You will fight," Delshay panted, his voice deadly. "You will fight the Inda you invited. You will bleed for your people. And if you survive, you will be banished. But if you ever look at her again, I will cut your eyes out." He turned away just as the distant sound of a cavalry bugle echoed through the rocks. The soldiers were coming. Chato's betrayal was complete. "To your places!" Delshay yelled, his personal rage instantly forged back into a leader's command. "We do this my way. Let them enter the Narrows. Fire on my signal. Do not break the line." He raced back to the high caves. The women and children were huddled in the darkness. He found Mireille, pressing Kael against the rock wall. She saw the blood on his arm. "You're hurt." "It is nothing." He grabbed her. His face was inches from hers. The smell of his sweat and rage was overwhelming. "You stay here. Do not make a sound. Do not move, no matter what you hear." "What is happening?" she whispered, terrified. "Chato betrayed us. The soldiers are here because of him, because of you." The words hit her like a slap. "Because of you. All the deaths, all this running. It was her fault." Delshay saw the look on her face. He hadn't meant it as an accusation, just a statement of fact. But seeing her guilt, something in him broke. He cupped the back of her head, his huge bloodied hand clumsy. He pulled her forehead to his. "No, because of me," he whispered, a confession. "Because Shija, mine. You stay alive, Matilda. You stay alive." He released her and melted back into the shadows of the canyon. Mireille was left shaking, the echo of his touch burning on her skin. She had heard the battle cries. She had heard the gunshots, but she had never heard the sound of Delshay, the giant Apache, afraid. The Blood Canyon earned its name that day. Lieutenant Warren was an arrogant man, but not a stupid one. He'd followed the almost too easy trail left by Chato, suspecting a trap. But he had 20 trained men with repeating rifles, and he was consumed by the idea of catching the infamous Delshay. He sent 2 scouts ahead. They were picked off by Apache rifles before they could scream. "Charge!" Warren ordered, believing the Apaches were few and could be overrun. The cavalrymen thundered into the narrow canyon. It was a fatal mistake. Delshay's signal, the cry of a red-tailed hawk, split the air. From 3 sides, rocks and bullets rained down. Horses screamed and fell, trapping men beneath them. The soldiers' repeating rifles were useless against an enemy they couldn't see. Delshay fought from the canyon floor, a demon of the dust. He was armed with a rifle, 2 pistols, and the knife Chato had cut him with. He moved between boulders, and every time he appeared, a soldier fell. He was fighting for his people, for his son, and for the woman in the cave. Chato, his arm broken and bound to his chest, fought with a desperate, suicidal fury. He had nothing left to lose. He charged the soldiers with only a pistol, screaming his rage, until 3 bullets stitched him across the chest. He fell, his eyes fixed on Delshay, a look of grim understanding on his face. He had paid for his betrayal. The battle lasted 20 minutes. It was a massacre. Warren, his horse shot out from under him, tried to rally his few remaining men. "Finn! Rogers! To the rocks! Find cover!" he yelled. Corporal Finn, a young man from Ohio, scrambled up the canyon wall, desperate to get a vantage point. He was terrified, his rifle slick with sweat. He pulled himself over a ledge and found himself at the mouth of a dark cave. Inside, huddled in the blackness, were the Apache women and children, and 1 white woman. Finn stared, his mind unable to process the sight. Mireille stared back, her hand over Cal's mouth. "My God," Finn breathed. "A white woman. You're safe. We've come to rescue you." He reached for her. "Come on, ma'am, we have to get you out of here." To his utter astonishment, she scrambled backward, pulling the Apache boy with her. "No, get away." "What's wrong with you?" Finn yelled, panicked. "They're savages. I'm here to save you." He grabbed her arm. Mireille, in a surge of pure primal terror, Not of the Apaches, but of losing this life, this strange, brutal safety she had found, opened her mouth and screamed. It was not a scream of a victim. It was a scream of warning. And it was not in English. Delshi! Down on the canyon floor, Delche was leveling his rifle for a final shot at Lieutenant Warren. He heard her scream. His name. He didn't hesitate. He dropped his rifle. He left his men. He left the fight. He abandoned his post as war chief. He bounded up the rocks, climbing a path only a goat would dare, his massive muscles propelling him upward. He burst onto the ledge just as Corporal Finn was trying to drag the hysterical Murray from the cave. Finn turned, his eyes wide with terror. He saw the giant Apache, covered in blood, his own and others. His face a mask of unbelievable fury. Finn raised his rifle. He never had a chance to fire. Delche's knife, thrown with all his strength, crossed the 10 feet between them and embedded itself in the soldier's throat. Finn gurgled, dropped his rifle, and fell backward off the ledge, tumbling to the canyon floor below. Silence. Delche stood at the mouth of the cave, breathing like a winded bull. His chest was heaving. Mireille was on her knees, shaking. Kyle was clinging to her. Delche walked into the cave. He ripped his knife from the wall where it had struck after passing through Finn. He looked at Mireille. She wasn't looking at him as a monster. She wasn't looking at him as a savage. She was just looking at him. All the barriers were gone. The raid, the capture, the slavery. It had all been burned away in that one scream. He had killed his enemy to protect her. She had called his name to save herself. He was her captor. She was his captive. And they were bound together by a chain forged in blood. Lieutenant Warren and 2 surviving soldiers had fled. The canyon was quiet, save for the moans of the dying. Delche grabbed Mireille's arm. His grip was not gentle, but it was not cruel. It was urgent. "We go," he said, his voice rough. "Dagode, now, before more come." He pulled her from the cave. He gathered his son. He whistled for his horse. As they rode away from the canyon, with the surviving members of his band following, Mireille did not look back. She clung to Delche, her face pressed against his bloody back, and for the first time, she did not feel like a prisoner. She felt claimed. They fled south. The Blood Canyon, the place of their desperate victory, was now a tomb behind them. They rode into the scorching, waterless heart of the Sonoran Desert, a place of red fangs and shimmering heat. Their destination was the jagged, hazy blue line of the Sierra Madre in Mexico, a fortress of stone where the Inda soldiers, the bluecoats, rarely dared to follow. The victory had been a phantom. It had cost them dearly. Delche now led only 6 fighting men, a dozen women, and a handful of children. He had lost 4 warriors, 4 rifles, 4 brothers. And in killing Chato, he had cut out a part of his own past. The Inanda band was broken, a fragment of what it had been. And there was Mireille. She was no longer a captive trailing at the rear. She rode near him, Kale often on the horse with her. The other women, their faces hollowed by grief and fear, no longer looked at her with hatred. They looked with a strange, unnerved awe. She was the one who had screamed the chief's name. She was the one for whom he had abandoned the battle. She was Delche Bijana Clay, Delche's protected one. And in saving her, he had become something different in their eyes. Something more human, and perhaps something more vulnerable. The retreat was a new kind of hell. It was worse than her first journey. This was not a march. It was a flight. They were harried, exhausted, and haunted. Every shadow was a cavalryman. Every gust of wind was a bugle call. On the 3rd day, the sky turned a sickly, bruised yellow. The wind did not rise, it fell away, leaving a silence so profound it was a pressure on the ears. Delche stopped the column. He tasted the air. His eyes narrowed. "Ma-haite," he said, the word a low growl, a sandstorm. He dismounted, his movements economical, urgent. "Tie the horses, head to tail. Cover your faces. Do not move." Before the last horse was secured, the wall of red dust hit them. It was not wind, it was an avalanche of grit. The world vanished instantly into a roaring, suffocating crimson black. The sun was extinguished. The air became a solid, stinging thing that scoured the skin and choked the lungs. Horses screamed. People vanished, separated by only a few feet. Delshai had grabbed Kyle with one arm and Mireille's hand with the other. "Here!" he roared over the howl, pulling them against the lee of his own horse, which was shuddering in terror. "Stay down!" He felt Mireille's hand rip from his. Not a choice, but the sheer force of the storm. He lunged blind, and his hand closed on her arm. He yanked her back, throwing her to the ground and covering her and Kale with his own massive body. He was their shield. For hours the world ceased to exist. There was only the scream of the wind and the feeling of being buried alive. When the storm finally passed, leaving the air thick and cold in the pre-dawn light, the world was remade. The landscape was alien, the dunes shifted, the landmarks gone, and they were alone. The rest of the band, the horses, the supplies, all gone, swallowed by the Mahite. Delshai rose, his body a map of new aches. He looked at the vast, empty expanse. No tracks, no people. Just him, the white woman, and his son. He was a chief with no NDE, a warrior with no one left to fight for but these two. Cal was weak, his lips cracked. The boy's breathing was shallow. He had inhaled too much dust. "Water," Mireille whispered, her own voice a dry rasp. Delshai unhooked his tsoch, the small water skin. He weighed it, barely a quarter full. He passed it to her. "For the boy." She gave Kale a few sips, then looked at Delshai. He shook his head. She wet her own lips, just barely, and handed it back. "We must find shelter," Delshai said. His voice was raw. He scanned the horizon, his eyes red-rimmed and aching, searching for a break, a shadow. "There." He pointed to a low slit in a distant rock formation. He put Kyle on his shoulders, though the wound in his arm screamed in protest, and began to walk. Mireille followed, her steps unsteady. The shelter was a narrow crevice, barely high enough to stand in, but it was out of the wind and the promise of the returning sun. They huddled in the back of it, a tiny failed tribe. Delshai sat at the entrance, his rifle across his knees, his body a silent blockade. He gave Kale the last of the water. They had no food. "They will find us," he said, more to himself than to her. "My men know this land. We wait." But as the sun set, the true enemy arrived. The desert, which had been an oven, became an icebox. The temperature plummeted with shocking speed. The heat was sucked from the rocks, from the air, from their bodies. Cal began to shiver. It started as a tremor, but within an hour, it was a violent, rattling quake. His teeth chattered. It was the same cold, deep shaking Mireille remembered from the RO. She pulled the boy against her, wrapping her arms and legs around him, trying to force her own meager warmth into his small body. She rubbed his hands, his back. It wasn't working. The cold was too deep. Delshai watched from the entrance. He saw the blue tint of his son's lips in the faint moonlight. He heard the rattling breaths. He pulled his own blanket from his shoulders, the only one they had, and tossed it to her. "Wrap him." She did, but it wasn't enough. Cal was a small furnace, and his fire was going out. Mireille looked at Delshai. He was a silhouette against the cold stars, unmoving. But she could see him, too. He was shivering, his massive shoulders bunched. He was trying to hide it. His wound, the long slash from Chato's knife, would be stiffening, aching in the chill. He needs more," Mireille said, her own voice trembling. Delshai did not answer. He was the chief. He was the guard. He endured. "You are cold, too," she said, the words bold in the silence. "The wound, it will freeze." He grunted a dismissal. "You cannot watch if you are frozen," she argued, her voice gaining a desperate, logical edge. "You cannot fight. We must share the warmth. All of us. It is the only way." He was silent for a long time. She was asking him to abandon his post. She was asking him to lie down, to make himself vulnerable, to touch her. Not as a captor, not in a moment of violence, but as a partner in survival. It was a line he had never considered crossing, but Kale let out a low, pained moan. That sound broke him. He moved. He crawled from the entrance and into the back of the narrow crevice. He lay down on the hard, cold stone, his back against the rock wall. He said nothing. He simply held out one arm. It was a command. Mireille hesitated for only a second. She turned, pulling Kyle with her, and lay down, her back pressed against Delchay's broad chest. He pulled his arm around her, and Kyle was sandwiched between them, a small, cold body between two larger ones. He then pulled the single blanket over all three of them. The small space was instantly filled with his presence. Mireille was rigid, her body locked in a kind of terror. She was pressed from shoulder to knee against the man who had stolen her life. She could feel the hard, corded muscle of his chest, the steady, powerful, slow beat of his heart against her spine. She could feel his breath, warm and even, stirring the hair at the nape of her neck. He was a furnace. He smelled of smoke, old leather, and the metallic tang of his own blood. Delchay lay in the dark, his arm around his captive, his son held fast. He was acutely aware of every part of her, the sharp, fragile angle of her shoulder blade, the curve of her hip. He could feel the fine, terrified trembling in her body. He tightened his grip, not in anger, but to stop her shaking, to pull her closer to the heat. He tried to stay awake. He was a warrior. This was his duty. His mind screamed at him to watch, to listen for the snap of a twig, the glint of a rifle. But the silence of the desert was absolute, and the small, living warmth against his chest. It was a medicine. It was the medicine from the wickiup, but 1,000 times stronger. He felt the tension in her body slowly ease as his heat seeped into her. He felt Cale's violent shivering subside into a mere tremor, and then, finally, stillness. The boy was asleep. The warrior's mind, always alert, always tormented by nightmares of fire and loss, finally stilled. The presence of her, right there, against him, a living, breathing anchor, was a powerful opiate. He found himself drifting, not into the black pits of his past, but into a deep, heavy, healing sleep. He woke with a jolt, his hand flying to his knife. Panic. He had failed, but it was dawn. The first gray light was spilling over the desert. He was alive. Kyle was breathing deeply, his face peaceful, tucked under Mireille's chin. And Mireille, she was still there, in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open, her gaze locking with his. She was only inches away. In the pale light, her eyes were not blue but gray, like the sky, and they were clear, and they were unafraid. He stared at her, this knocky-yes woman, his anchor. He confessed the truth, first to himself, and then to her, the words rough in the cold air. She ja, he whispered in the Inda tongue. Mine. He saw the flicker of understanding. He fumbled for the broken English she had taught him. I cannot sleep, he said, the admission tearing from his chest. Not without you in my arms. It was not a declaration of love as her people knew it. It was not gentle. It was a raw admission of fact, a confession of his deepest weakness, his most profound need. She was his, because without her, he was lost. Mireille heard him. She truly heard him. And in that moment, all the old-world definitions of love and capture, of fear and safety, blurred and dissolved. She was no longer Mireille Fry of the Gila River Ranch. She was, in this harsh new world, his, and she did not pull away. They stayed in the crevice for another day. The truce of the cold night held. They were no longer captor and captive. They were a family, a strange, broken, two-person and a child family. That afternoon, Delchay's scouts found them. Two warriors, their faces grim, appeared on the ridge. The relief on their faces when they saw their chief was profound. The rest of the band was 5 miles north, hidden, waiting. As they prepared to leave, Delchay went to hunt, to bring meat to his people. He handed Mireille his rifle. Kyle, was all he said. It was the ultimate trust. He was arming his prisoner against the world. While he was gone, she took Kyle to a nearby wash to find water. The boy was stronger, chasing a lizard. Mireille walked, the heavy rifle in her hands, her mind trying to process the night before. And then she saw it. The body. It was a white man wedged between two boulders, half buried by the sandstorm. A dead mule lay a few yards away. A prospector, she guessed, dead from thirst or the storm. She felt a cold, distant pity. He was Nakai, yes, like her. He was a ghost from her old world. Delshay returned, 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder. He saw her looking. He walked over, his face unreadable. Death was just a part of the landscape. She knelt by the man's scattered belongings. A pick, a rusted canteen, a leather satchel, its side split open. As she looked, a small, glinting object in the dust caught her eye. It had fallen from the bag. It wasn't a rock. It was silver. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Even before her fingers touched the metal, she knew. The cold, familiar weight. It was a locket. Her locket. Her fingers, stiff and clumsy, fumbled with the catch. It snapped open. Inside was a tiny faded tin type. Her own face stared back. A girl of 18, taken in Tucson. A ghost. She turned it over. On the other side, inscribed in the silver, were words she had read 1,000 times. To my Tilly, find your way home. GF. The air left her lungs. It was impossible. She had seen him, in the water trough, dead. He's alive, she whispered, the words a choked, agonizing sob. It all flooded in. The prospector. Her father must have met him. He had survived the raid. Survived. He had given this man the locket, paid him, perhaps, to look for her. He was searching for her. Gideon Fry. Her father. He was alive. Delshay stood over her. He had been skinning the rabbits, but he had stopped, his knife frozen in his hand. He watched the locket fall from her grip. He watched her face, which had, just that morning, held a kind of peace, shatter into 1,000 pieces of hope and agony. He bent, his massive hand surprisingly gentle, and picked up the locket. He looked at the inscription. G.F. Gideon Fry, the man by the water, the man he had left for dead. He understood. The woman in his arms, the woman he could not sleep without, the woman who had just accepted her new life. She had an old one, and it was alive, and it was looking for her. He looked north, toward Fort Bowie, toward the Inda settlements, toward the world of Gideon Fry. Then he looked south, toward the Sierra Madre, where his people were waiting, where safety and his future lay. He had just found his peace. He had just confessed his soul, and now the fates were tearing it from his grasp. He could keep her. He could destroy the locket and drag her to Mexico. She was his captive. She was Shija, mine. Mireille looked up at him, her face streaming with tears, her hands outstretched, not for the locket, but in a desperate, silent plea. She was begging him, but not with words. Delshay, the giant Apache chief, the warrior who had killed and bled and lost everything, faced a choice more terrible than any battle. His heart, which he thought had turned to stone, was breaking. And the desert, silent and uncaring, waited for his answer. The story of Delshay and Mireille Fry doesn't end there, in that dusty arroyo. It ends with a choice that echoes across the plains. He is a giant, not just of body, but of pride and pain. She is his captive, his savior, and the only peace he has ever known. But her father, Gideon Fry, is alive, and the locket in her hand is a chain pulling her back to a world he cannot enter. What choice is there? To keep her is to possess her, but to let her go is to lose himself. This is the brutal reality of the Old West, where love and survival are often the same terrible thing. What do you think he did? What would you have done? If this story captured your imagination and you want to hear more tales from the raw, untamed heart of the West, please show your support. Like this video, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Your support lets us keep digging up these forgotten histories. Click that bell icon so you never miss an episode. Thank you for listening.